Okay. Well, it's 5 o'clock. Welcome everyone to the Board of Revision. We have one person here to present today, and I'll let the two of you introduce yourselves and we'll get started.
How's it going?
Oh, and Mayor Murphy is joining us online as well tonight. Yes.
So Mia's behind you.
Nice to see you guys. I'm behind you all the way.
Very nice.
You can go ahead and introduce
All
yourself.
right, excellent. Thank you very much. My name is Wes Van Briggen. I'm with M&P LLP, and we're representing Canadian craft paper industries, or the mill. So we'll be talking, we've got two properties under appeal today. I'm assuming, which one did we want to start with? Is there a process for which one you want to do first?
You can do whichever one you choose first.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so if we could grab the larger submission, Mr. Mayor, sorry, we can send them electronically. I just, I didn't have it, together to send it to the letter, but I was going to grab it, so. I apologize about that. All right, so if everyone has the package, we can get started. So a couple things, just before I get started, a couple housekeeping matters. As we're going through, I'll be referring to the bottom right-hand page number within the submission. Should be identified as page 1 of 153. Don't worry, I'm not going through 153 pages. I know it sounds intimidating. I would expect the presentation probably to take my initial part about half hour, give or take. So it's more supporting documentation than anything else. The other piece of the puzzle is I have been told in the past I'm a bit of a fast speaker. So if I am going too fast, please just wave me down, flag me down, let me know to slow down. Happy to do so. All right. Well, if everyone can turn with me to page 5. So generally when I'm going through the presentation, I like to give a little bit of a preamble, discuss the property in question, just kind of give a little bit of high level information before we get down into speaking of the specifics. Here we have the executive summary. Oh, sorry, apologize, just give me 1 second here. Oh, my phone reminded me, I should check that out. Just kind of outlining just some of the general things where we got involved. So Canadian Craft Paper Industries reached out to us a little while ago, had some concerns with their assessments for their property. And I'm sure, as you're all well aware, the assessment process is that the management assessment department comes up with the value of the property. There is an opportunity to review that value and determine whether or not it seems reasonable and to file an appeal if there's some concerns with it. So we had taken a look at that value. There's some concerns that initial assessment of that property at 19, I believe it's 19,701,500 was too high, and that's where we got involved. So after we filed the appeal, we did have some conversations with the assessment department trying to find a middle ground. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find a solution that worked for everyone, so we did have those conversations, and that's why we find ourselves here today. Obviously,
Quick question.
Yeah.
You did speak to the assessment branch?
yes.
What was the offer from the assessment branch?
I mean, it was without prejudice, so I'm not, I mean, I will leave it up to the assessor whether they want to speak about it. It was kind of understood not to be, we had taken something to the client, they had said no, so I don't want to, value a relationship with the assessment branch. So not that I don't want to answer your question.
Okay, well, I'm sure you'll answer.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so we had that conversation. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find a solution that worked for everyone, so here we are today. The big concern is really in terms of the depreciation that's being applied to the mill. So obviously, the mill is a unique property. They don't typically transact within the market. I believe there's only one pulp paper plant or paper mill within Manitoba. And I believe actually, if we take a look at Manitoba, Saskatchewan, the one in Prince Albert has been closed down. So a fairly limited market for what we're looking at. So it does make sense that the cost approach is a reasonable approach. Now, the way the cost approach works, and just for I'm sure everyone's aware, but just for your indication, The way it's done is the land is valued and then a replacement cost for the buildings are determined. So basically what happens is the assessment department goes through, looks at all of the buildings, looks at the size of the buildings, looks at the construction of the buildings, and comes up with what their, and then applies an appreciation, and comes up with what their estimate would be of what it would cost to reproduce that mill, the mill as of the valuation date, April 1st, 2023. So in looking at that, again, I don't think we necessarily have a concern with the characteristics. So in terms of the size of the buildings and the number of buildings, that's not so much of a concern. More the concern is around the depreciation that's been applied to the buildings. So that's primarily what we'll be talking about here today as we go through the presentation. So within the depreciation, so if the board will turn with me. If we can turn to page 17, please. And again, I apologize, there's probably a lot of this information that everyone's familiar with, but you know, just part of the process of going through it, making sure that we are all on the same page. So as mentioned, the important consideration of legislation and what we're required to do when valuing properties is we have to determine what is the market value of that property. And the market value is defined as the most probable price that the property would receive sold in a competitive and open market, with all the conditions required for a fair sale. So that being a buyer and seller, each acting prudently, knowledgeably, and without undue pressure. It assumes the property has been exposed to the market, payments are made in cash or the equivalent, and it's unaffected by any atypical market conditions. So the sales history of the property. So the property was purchased November 2016. The declared value of that property is $1. So that property had been purchased for $1. I believe there was also some working capital that had transferred over. So again, if we're trying to look at what is a value for the property, arguably a purchase price is a pretty good indication. However, we do understand that $1 is, you know, an unreasonable, is a very low request. So we have taken a look at the cost approach as outlined by the assessment department to say, okay, using the cost approach, what would a reasonable value be? As mentioned, the idea of the cost approach is one of substitution. So how much would you pay to build the property as it is versus how much would you pay to buy it? So as we take a look at this, if the board can turn with me to, and I apologize, we're gonna flip back a couple pages. Flipping back to, sorry, if we can flip to page 24, please. So page 24, this is the assessment for this property. So this is how the assessment department has valued this particular property. As you can see, and this information starts on page 24, continues on until page, there's quite a few buildings. Continues on until page 73. So as you flip through that site, and just as an example, if the board will turn with me to page, let's turn to page 28, please. And these are the parameters that I looked at. So page 28, you can see that this is the administrative on the bottom there, ICI structures. This is the administrative office, building 44. You can see that the property has been identified as a multi-story good office or bank. The year of construction is 1990. The plan area is 5,805 square feet. The replacement value new, RCN is replacement value new as $2.6 million. That would be, if that property were brand new today, that's what the estimate would be using the market value approach to calculate what that value is. Now, of course, we understand that a building that was built in 1990 is not gonna still sell the same as a brand new office building. So to account for that, they apply depreciation. You can see here that they've applied depreciation of 56% to account for the age. Depreciation is oftentimes just, say, you have a building, it has a particular life, so typically office buildings are about 40 years. They say, okay, the building has 40-year life, since we know it was built in 1999, it's 30 years through its life. What's depreciation should be applied? So that's the depreciation.
So is your market value based off of the POP or is it based off of Winnipeg?
So the market value is based on the POP. Yeah. So then they've got so they have the depreciation that they apply. Then there's a physical obsolescence. So that's just the nature of the building. So that's, obviously as time goes on, as buildings age, they need to have money put into them. At times, money doesn't get put into them. So there's some physical obsolescence that has to be applied. There's economic obsolescence. So that's basically just how has the market changed in the area to account for that. And then there's some depreciate, and then we have total depreciation and the total value. So you can see all of those parameters. And this is all information that's been provided by the assessment department in their valuation. So this is all information that came from management assessment.
Could I,
So,
one question? Sorry, I'm right behind you here. Just to back up on it. So when you were talking about that administration building, did you say replacement cost? Like if you had to replace that building, it was $2.9 million?
Yeah, so the way the replacement value is determined, and just for everyone's guidance here. What happens is what we use a costing manual. It's called the Marshall Swift costing manual. And I'm sure the assessment department will fill in a little bit more there. But what that is basically a manual where it takes a look at these buildings and says, okay, typical office buildings have cost this much per square foot to build.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where the $2.6 million comes from, is if you build a brand new office building out in the fall, that's 5,805 square feet, the estimated cost from Marshall Swift would be $2,620,000.
Yeah. So, and that's a replacement cost relative to the location in northern Manitoba.
Exactly, so there would be some adjustments to that, so there are adjustment factors that are applied, but that's basically what that value would be, as of April 1st, 2023.
What are we using for square footage cost on that?
So square footage costs, here, give me 1 sec, I can run it up.
$400?
So we'd be looking at 2.655 divided by 5. It would be $451 is what the replacement, what was calculated by the assessment. So what has happened is that the assessment department has gone through each building within the plant, and they've come up with what the replacement value is going to be, applying depreciation to each one of those sites. Now, in looking at that, there are a couple of areas where M&P did have some concerns. So we're not contesting the buildings, but really what we're looking at is we have some concerns when it comes to the depreciation that's been applied to the property. So the first issue that we have is, if the board will turn with me, starting on. So actually, if we go to page 29. So that would be the next one. So this would be the sawmill relay. You can see that this is a heavy steel warehouse built 1975. You can see that it's has a 40-year life, and you can see that it's 70% depreciated.
Have you been in it lately?
Sorry?
Have you been in it lately?
The sawmill. So this one's not the one with the collapsed roof. The one with the collapsed roof we'll be talking about on the next file.
So which one are you talking about?
So this one is this one's a fairly small, 864 square feet. So it's a fairly small. It's not the big one. This is just one of the more support buildings.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can see that the assessment department has applied 70% depreciation on that. If the board will turn with me to the next page, we had the wood prep, our RM 1971, 70% depreciation. The board turns with me to page 31. You can see the hog reclaim building. You can see the years 1971, 70% depreciation. So as you look through here, one of the big concerns is that while we might, under the age life approach, so if we consider how old these buildings are, built in 1970, if we consider the fact that, you know, these buildings are going on, what is that, 50 years, the city has capped, the assessment department has chosen to cap the depreciation at 70%. So you won't see any depreciation higher than 70%. Now, the concern for this is, and I understand that that is something that the assessment department has done. However, that doesn't reflect what the reality would be. So there's always a question when we're depreciating properties, how much depreciation to apply. We, in our opinion, about 80, we should be seeing an 80% depreciation applied to that building. And if the board will turn with me, and I'm gonna flip around a little bit, if the board will turn with me to page 75, please. So starting on page 75, we have a report on major industry property tax impacts. This is from BC, so I will acknowledge that Manitoba is not BC. However, when we are looking at pulp and paper mills, we either have BC, we've got Ontario, or we have Quebec. I mean, there's some out on the East Coast. But again, we're fairly limited for what we're looking at. So when we're trying to make a determination of what should we be doing on these, one of the considerations we're looking at is what have other municipalities done when treating their pulp and paper plants? How have they looked at their mills? If the board will turn with me to page 81. So on page 81, again, if you take a look, so this is going through an executive summary. Again, I'm not gonna go through this in significant detail. I just want to draw the board's attention to where we got our 80%. Under overview of the BC property tax system, second paragraph, the BC system is distinctive in that assessments of major industry built improvements is not based, but rather utilized on the cost manual, commonly referred to as the major industrial property manual. So similar thing, they're basically costing these properties. Again, unique properties, they're being costed. These costs estimated from the MPI manual are depreciated and legislated annual depreciation rate that range from 4 to 6.5% per year. In an instance of operating major industrial plant, the annual depreciation is capped at a maximum of 80%. So as we take a look at this, we can see how are other municipalities or how are other provinces treating their pulp and paper plants. So while we see that Manitoba is capping it at 70% for depreciation, we can see that in other areas, they are capping that at 80%. Same thing if you take a look on page 85 and to page 86, again, outlining the fact that the maximum of 80% depreciation has been applied to the building. This is on the top of page 86. So again, as we're taking a look at these properties, it's our position that at 70% capping the depreciation at 70% is too low. Once you consider what other areas are doing, once you consider what the depreciation for these buildings typically are, again, we feel that a depreciation of 80% would be a better approach to be using when we're looking at some of these older buildings. Typically, the buildings built in the 1970s that are kind of the 50 years old. I mean, we've reached the end of their economic life. So there's really not a whole lot of value remaining in the building. So that's why. So that would be the first difference between M&P's valuation as well as the assessment department's valuation, just in terms of the amount of depreciation to apply for the economic or for the physical depreciation to be applied.
What are they doing in Alberta and Saskatchewan?
So Alberta does, they cost them, I don't exactly know what depreciation they're applying on that. Saskatchewan, they only have the mill up in Prince Albert, and the mill's been shuttered for years. As far as I'm aware, I don't know, I haven't looked at the valuation of that one.
I believe there's a pulp mill in Meadow Lake, isn't there?
Meadow Lake as well.
Is it a pulp mill or is it a sawmill?
Well, I think there's both there. I mean,
Yeah, okay. Okay, I didn't,
and then there's many sawmills in Saskatchewan as well. And the other question I would be is using mills similar to ours or our age, what would be done in southern Ontario around Thunder Bay and stuff.
Yeah, you bet. So we certainly looked at the information from impacts. that's the municipal property assessment, division, so that's out of BC, that's out of Ontario. So we certainly looked at that, what they're doing, they didn't give us any hard and fast numbers on the max depreciation that they were applying. So when we went to try to gather some information, unfortunately, for better or for worse, MPAC had, you have to have a similar property, so we weren't able to get the specifics. We did review a lot of information when it came from Impact, when it came to evaluations and certain considerations to be looking at when we were valuing, mills, and pulp paper plants. But we didn't have, unfortunately, we weren't able to get, as clear numbers as we could out of BC. That makes sense?
So we've got, you're just basically being compared to BC, no other place.
Yeah, so again, with lack of, again, it would be for, if you give me a industrial building, a warehouse, 5,000 square feet, we got lots of information on that. We can tell you pretty clearly what, that would be selling for the market. Same thing if you have, a 5,000 square foot store, we can have lots of information. When you have a pulp and paper plant, it's a little different. Obviously, it's very unique in and specialized. So when we were casting in that, we were trying to find any information that we could find that would give us that would give us hard numbers for us to be using in our valuation. And that just happened to be what we could get out of BC.
So just to be clear, like Hudson Bay wasn't brought into this picture at all, like the mills that they have there, they're by all means not the same size as Craft Paper, but there's also 2 mills there as well.
Sorry, where was that?
Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan.
No, so again, when I was looking at that, we're looking at the information, I looked at Prince Albert, we knew that there was a mill just outside of Prince Albert that had been shut down. We were trying to find some information, I couldn't get any information on appreciation that they're doing, on that, and when it came to the other mills up in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, I didn't know. Any more questions?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, so that's the first issue, which is the amount of the physical depreciation to be applied. The assessment department, management assessment department is capped at 70%. We feel that a cap of 80% would be more reasonable based on the information we were able to pull. The second question that we had, or the second issue that we had, is the economic obsolescence. So obviously, when we're taking a look at the pulp and paper industry, this is a fairly specialized property. It really only makes sense to be buying it if you're running a pulp and paper plant. There's really not a lot of other opportunities. If you have an industrial building, you can do manufacturing, you can do distribution, you can do, there's just more opportunities. With a retail store, you can have a restaurant, you can have a variety of different things. When it comes to pulp paper plant, there's not as many different opportunities to pivot to something else, as it is fairly specialized in how it's built for a very particular purpose. So certainly one of the considerations we're looking at is how would the market look at a pulp and paper plant? So that's the economic obsolescence that's been applied to the property. So when we're taking a look at that, there's a number of different ways we could look at it. We certainly did consider a variety of different ways, such as what would the cost of modernization be if the plant were to be modernized. But again, that's not super helpful. Cost estimates were quite high, and it didn't really give us a good way of valuing the property. What would would we be able to introduce new machinery and equipment, so more modernize this and shift it? Well, again, the information we got back wasn't super helpful. So what we ultimately ended up doing is we took a look at what is the max production of the plant and what are they actually producing to get a sense of what that difference is. So if they were producing the max amount of paper, what would that be and where are they right now in that production? So if the board will turn with me to page 19. So on page 19, 12.5, economic obsolescence. Economic obsolescence is a loss in value resulting from external market or economic conditions that negatively affect the property's profitability or utilization or utility. It reflects factors beyond the property itself, such as industry decline, reduced demand, increased input costs, regulatory pressures, and local disadvantages. So for the subject property, economic obsolescence is obviously a consideration. Based on our conversations with both the plant and information we were able to gather, during optimal business conditions, the plant is capable of producing 480 metric tons of product per day. Based on the economic conditions as outlined below, it was our determination that that production is closer to 395 metric tons per day. So when we calculated, to try to calculate what the economic obsolescence is, what we did is we took the optimal production, that's the 420 metric tons per day. We took in consideration what the actual production of that is, and we just tried to determine what is the shortfall. So how much lower of that optimal production is occurring from the plant. What we ended up with was we ended up with an 18% adjustment to account for that. And the adjustment basically is we provide the calculations there. You can see at the bottom of the page, 480 MT minus 395 MT, we divide by 480 metric tons, which takes us, the board will turn to page 20 to the 18%. It should be noted that the Manitoba Assessment Department has applied a 4% adjustment for economic obsolescence to the property, where based on our calculations, we feel that adjustment should be 18%. So again, we're not doing anything the assessment department hasn't already done. The assessment department does recognize there is economic obsolescence on the property. They do recognize there's physical depreciation on the property. The question and the issue that we have is just in terms of the inputs that they're using. We feel that those inputs are not high enough to account for what the actual physical characteristics of that property are, to account for what the actual realities of the market are.
I got a question for you around that economic obsolescence. So are you saying that the production is scaled back due to lack of sales or lack of demand for the product?
Again, certainly when we're taking a look at determining economic obsolescence, we have to try to find some way to function. So we would assume that if the property is capable of producing 480 tons per day, that we would see it meeting that production. If the production is lower than that, it's because there's not enough demand in the market, or it doesn't make, there's not enough demand in the market, or there's something that is resulting in that, whether that be input costs or the ability to run the correct, be able to run the mill as often as for as many days as you need.
Yeah.
Whatever that would be.
Yeah. So I mean, so I guess what I'm trying to understand, if you're telling me that the market conditions for unbleached high performance craft paper is at a point where there's actually no demand for it throughout the world, and that they're optimizing their production to be at 395. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so yeah, so we're saying right now, optimal production is 480. Right now, they're only producing at 395.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so there's a difference there. So if they're underproducing by that much, then the question is, if someone were to buy this property, if someone were to look to buy the property in the market, and that they're not producing it at their optimal amount, how much would they be willing to pay? And it's our position that will have an impact on any purchaser, any consideration of the property.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand because I think earlier you mentioned that this doesn't take into account equipment or if you had to relife or do things like that around making an investment in the equipment. So you remove that out of there for the value, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the market and how that would impact the value of the equipment or the value of the asset.
Well, and I think, and to answer your question, I think the reason we're looking at what the market is because it is a special purpose property. So, for example, if this were a property that you could use it for a variety of different reasons, well, then we wouldn't necessarily be concerned of what the market is going to be, right? There would be lots of other things you could do with it. If you've got, let's say you've got a restaurant and that, and it happens to be a McDonald's, that McDonald's doesn't work there, well, then you can probably put a Burger King or a Wendy's or, something, I'd say more, something else in that restaurant. There's options, right? You can switch it out, you can put another tenant in, that's not a problem. For the problem with the mill is it's obviously very purpose built, so there's really not a lot of other options, you know, it would be it wouldn't make sense to take it and convert it to, say, production of airplanes. It just, that's not the
No.
way the building is designed. So you have to take a look and say, okay, if you are to sell it, and you're obviously gonna sell to another pulp paper plant, or someone who's specialized in pulp paper. If the market is down, if they know that they're not gonna be producing, at the top level, and there's gonna be that difference, would they pay the same amount if they knew they could produce 480 MTP, metric ton per day, versus if they're only providing 395? That would impact what that market value would be.
I'm pretty confident to say that if they could produce 480 tons a day, they'd be producing 480 tons a day, and that it would have an impact on their financials.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to want, and that's the problem, and that's what we're saying is, because they can't produce at 480 tons, of only producing at 395, that there needs to be an adjustment because the market just can't take 400, they can't sell that in the market, so.
Well,
that
I'm
would
not,
happen.
yeah, I mean, I won't belabor the point, but I believe the market could support that, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think the challenge, and this is again, it's off conversations that we've had, some of the things that we have come up with, are the transportation costs, some of the, you know, obviously tariffs are concerned, that came after July 1st, but that was obviously having, April 1st, that were having an impact, but just the fact, and then additional competition for the US, because at the end of the day, they're not producing on an island, there are other mills, while there aren't other mills in Manitoba, there are other mills around that are producing. And if they can produce it cheaper, or they can get that product to market cheaper, then you end up losing your competitive advantage within the market. If I can buy paper from a US mill for, you know, 15% less than what it's gonna cost me to buy from this mill, then I'm probably gonna be making all my purchases from the US mill, right? So that's where that challenge comes into play here. And that's part of the reason why we do feel that an adjustment needs to be made for economic obsolescence when we're looking at the property.
I would just echo what the mayor said. I think if the company could do 480 a day, they'd do it and they'd sell it. It's a unique product.
For sure. Okay,
Just a reminder, we've got a council meeting at 6.
okay,
And we still want to leave time for the assessment branch to
you bet.
give us their take.
Okay, so if the board will turn with me to page 14, please. So page 14, I apologize for the very small font. Yeah, it's small. So this is the valuation that this is how we've come up with our requested value. So MFP is requesting a value of $11,839,760. That is based on the building values. So to adjust the building values, the adjustments that we made, we increased the depreciation to 80% for anything that was 1970, 1971, 1975 to account for the age of those buildings. So the assessment department has capped it at 70%, we moved that to 80%. Then when it comes to economic obsolescence, the assessment department has used economic obsolescence of 4%, we've increased that to 18%. Again, we feel that economic obsolescence has been underassessed. When we take all of those factors into play, we get a total value of $11,340,860.29. Adding back the land value of $498,900, that's how we get a requested value. So when we're saying we're looking for that $11,840,000, we provided the calculations there, and the reason being is the depreciation and the economic obsolescence applied. I believe that concludes my presentation, the rationale for our adjustments, and certainly welcome if anyone has any more questions or from the assessment department.
Let's have a couple of questions for the assessment branch before you start. We can speed things up.
Okay, for sure.
Back to the question asked before, the if, back to the rate of, we're talking 80%, you want 80%, Assessor Branch is saying 70%.
Yeah,
In
typically,
negotiations, did you find middle ground there somewhere?
we reviewed it, but we feel that 70% is reasonable for it.
You're saying,
Our understanding is, and the way we practice it is usually when a property is at 70%, it's near the end of its economic life and it's, to put it like, they're starting to fall apart in a sense. So to go anything above that would be just overstating the depreciation.
and, the former question I had asked on the depreciation amount, or not this, not the depreciation, but the assessment amount. They're looking at, for 19 million to 11 million. Was there some middle ground there? Are you staying still on the bottom, the 11 million?
I think 11 million is a little too low. I was talking, like, to be completely honest, I'm not the ones that come up with these evaluations. We have somebody in Winnipeg that understands the cost properties. But 11 million would be extremely aggressively low in my opinion, and his opinion also.
Was there opinions a little higher up?
Yeah, probably around that. Like, I can tell you just without prejudice, when we did discuss the numbers, we did look at,
That's helpful for us, you know, before we make the decision on it. We know what's already been discussed and what has been favorable, what has not been favorable.
yeah, like when we were discussing and we did look at the production numbers to add more economic obsolescence. When we were discussing numbers, we were prepared to come down from 19,701,500. And we proposed 18,762,100.
Any other questions?
You're
Good to go? Okay. So I won't go too much in the depreciation, but if you guys want to discuss anything, just feel free to interject or ask me at the end. But our current assessment is 19,701,500, and we were asking the board to confirm that assessment. As you can look at the brief, we did provide some pictures of the mill, not too many, but we did inspect this mill in. When was our last on-site inspection? Me and my colleague from Winnipeg did inspect it. I believe it was June 2024 or July 2024, but it was in the last 18 months that we were on site and we did do a full walkthrough of the mill. And then just as we go on to page 6 and 7, it's just discussing our land value and how it's supported, along with all of our replacement costs. So this is a replacement cost new, if it was totally to be built, which would be very hard to do, I could imagine, but our total replacement cost is $94,220,999. And then we just go over the types of depreciation we have. Majority of the buildings would have 70% depreciation on them. And then additional, the 4% economic. And that is how we establish that 4% economic is the production numbers are exchanged with our head office and we determine how far off of their production they are. And then we will apply a discount to, because the property never fully runs at 100% production. I'm sure they would like to, but it's just, they have shutdown days. I know you mentioned in April, they shut down for 80 days when they had some machinery broken. So we do take into account when the production is not running at 100%, and then we do adjust it. So that 4%, that's what it is for this reassessment, but next reassessment, it could be 6% or 7%. And just to give you an idea with that reduction that we offered, without prejudice, it was, we were moving up to 7% economics. So going from that 4 to 7% knocked off almost $1 million in the assessment, just to clarify on that one.
So when production is shut down, though, they're also doing maintenance.
Yeah,
So the buildings are being upgraded as well, not just equipment.
yeah. And I guess we don't really capture the changes that do happen to the property. Like if they patch the wall, we're not gonna be like, we patch this wall, we have a building permit. We understand that these buildings, they're industrial buildings. There's gonna be lots of deficiencies in them. We understand that there's gonna be a lot of maintenance that needs to be done, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast when we come to these big industrial buildings.
Just for clarification, this assessment appeal is for 2024. The impact of the 80-day shutdown this year where you're at financial hardships. that will be next year. That's got nothing to do with this.
Right, and that's why we didn't talk, and that's why we weren't talking about the number of shut that day. So when we're talking production numbers, like we're talking what the average production numbers that they've given us prior to April 1st, 2023, as well as what their optimal production would be. Yeah, so that was part of it.
Yeah, I just added that just because we do take into account when there are production, and we do talk to, in this case, Canadian Craft, and we do discuss with the production. Not me specifically, but one of my colleagues in Winnipeg, and that's how we establish the values and. Yeah, and so we are asking the board to confirm the assessment of 19,701,500. And any questions, I am happy to answer them to the best of my abilities.
So you wanted to confirm that 19,701,500, did you?
Yes, that is correct.
You said a moment ago you had reduced that.
That was when we were discussing without prejudice because, and we didn't make those changes.
What was the amount of prejudice?
18,762, 100. I think.
We both have presentations for the sawmill as well.
Yeah, the presentation will be fairly good.
Okay, so we're done with this package. We can move
Unless
on.
there's any other questions, yeah, that we're. included that.
Let's move on to the sawmill.
Okay, sounds good.
We're at 541.
Sounds good. We will be shorter on this one. If everyone can turn with me, the board can turn with me to page 12. So on page 12, we have the current assessment of the property. You can see the assessment is, wait a minute. You can see the assessment is $603,000. That is comprised of $60,500 of land value and $542,500 of building value. The building value that you're going to see there is primarily related to the sawmill, and then there is some value for the smaller buildings. Now, obviously, that large sawmill has not been operational for a number of years, and just last week the roof fell down. So if the board will turn with me to page 12, you can see the characteristics of the property. So we've just provided a picture there of that building. You can see that roof has fallen down. It was acknowledged to have been in poor condition for a number of years, so it's not overly surprising that that's the end result. Now, again, this building transacted when it sold for $1 back in 2016. The assessment department has valued this using the cost approach, so they are looking at what the replacement value of the building is. If the board will turn with me to page 4. So on page 4, we can show the picture there. So one of the conversations that we had with the assessment department and where we disagreed a little bit is the assessment department had come back in our conversation and said, well, there's scrap metal to the property. There's all this scrap metal. So we think, so based on the calculation, about 200,000 pounds of scrap steel in the building, that steel has value, which we agree, there is value to the steel. However, the other side to that is the demolition cost of that building. So there is, certainly that steel has so much value, but there is also the cost of taking down the building and getting that steel to a place where you can actually get money for it. So the challenge that we face is when we take a look at the demolition cost for the building, we're calculating demolition costs at anywhere between $2.5 and $3 million to account for what it would take to take down that building. So we provided a full breakdown of what that cost would be, whether that be mobilization, structural demolition, concrete slab removal, transport and disposal. We've taken into consideration the salvage credit for the building. And if the board will turn with me to page 6. We have what that total is. So here we show all of those elements together resulting in a total value or a total cost of 2.575 million. That includes salvage cost of the steel at $390 per ton. So after we consider that, it's our position that there is more cost than there is salvage value in this building. So it would be our argument that there should be zero value attributed to the building. So certainly we understand that there's value there, but the cost of taking it down and demolishing it would outstrip that. When we take in consideration the other buildings on the site, we're calculating $92,400 worth of value, plus a $60,500 with land value, for a total requested value of $152,900 for that property. And again, that's primarily related to taking that sawmill and saying there is no value to it. Or we shouldn't be attributing any value to it. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? No? Oh, why don't you then join us? Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, as Wesley discussed, we have currently 603,000 assessment on the building, and we are asking the board to confirm this assessment.
I missed that number. Can you say it one more time?
603,000.
Thank you.
And the brief that I sent, if you turn to page 7, I have a breakdown of the heavy steel warehouse. This would be the sawmill. It's currently depreciated out at 70%, and then another additional 60%. I know that doesn't come to 100%. So what they do is you would have 70%, so that's depreciated. So we only have 30% of the building value left. And then on top of that 30%, we're adding another 60% functional and 36% economic. I just confused myself. Wait, basically, we are aware that the sawmill is in very poor condition. And based on our assessment, we are currently assessing it at about $1 per square foot.
When you say functional, to what capacity?
It's it was run down. When we went there in May, like we did not see the roof falling in, but when we were there in May 2024, like it's not being used for anything. But the idea of assessment, and this goes back a long way, is until a building is completely removed, we never remove that residual value off the building. Same thing with, and we're not talking about farmhouses and stuff like that, but municipalities, if you just take the assessment off, there's no real incentive for the appellant or the taxpayer to remove the building. They could just leave it and then it becomes a hazard. So we always do leave a residual value on that, but at $1 a square foot, that's pretty well as low as we can go on that.
It comes out to
600,000. Like, the main old sawmill is 521,216 square feet. And then there's additional buildings. There's one that's 50,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet. They're just all located on page 6 of mine. And it just kind of shows you the breakdown of all the buildings on this roll entry. And all those buildings equate to about 542,500 in building assessment.
because the sawmill itself is not functional in any way right now.
No,
Legally, you can't even go into it.
yeah. And that's our understanding. We do agree that, yeah, and it's probably not gonna make a comeback from our
So
system.
you came back at assessed $1 a foot, square foot.
Yeah,
Without prejudice. Where'd you come in on that?
And we said there shouldn't be any value attributed, but now we consider demolition cost of the building, we consider the salvage value of the steel, like it's gonna cost more than, like, it's a drag, it'll be a drag, so. So we didn't attribute any value to it.
Okay. Right.
yeah, it's just.
None of the
Buildings-
building at all is, none of the building in like that Kiln 5 or Kiln 6 area, the Stacker building, I know that was all brand new buildings. That's sort of isolated from the existing sawmill, which is you know, probably 30 or 40,000 square feet, there's nothing there? That's not worth anything?
We did have value attributed to those, so that's where the other that's where the other roughly $100,000 comes in is for the other buildings. So the
Okay.
majority of the value of that building, or that assessment is for, the sawmill, so it's our position that that sawmill has zero value, but we did attribute value to the other. And you can see that if page 7 of the assessor's brief has that value at 350.
Does anybody have any further questions?
Lots of information provided. I know traditionally, correct me wrong, Nick, board of revision are usually make a decision the night of the, once we receive both information back and forth. I propose, was the amount of information here and, what we've learned so far tonight. I'd like to, postpone making a decision and just reschedule our meeting for council to further discussion and, make a decision within the next couple of days. If council would be, go along with that, we'll just pick a date and we'll reconvene as the board and come up with a decision.
I think that's a good idea. Okay. You're okay with that?
Yeah, certainly, we've certainly seen boards
Yeah.
mail the decision out at a later point, so that's not a problem. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks
Thank you.
for your time, appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.
Motion to adjourn? There we go, Gary.